The Catholic Men's Podcast, helping you find good works of literature for the Catholic gentleman. Welcome back to the Catholic Men's Podcast. I know it's been quite some time since I've done an episode, but it's because I've been trying to research so many different topics, and the only way I could think of to present them to you would be in this sort of rambling style. If not, I'd have to present a 1,000-page thesis on all these things, and the course of study through January and part of February in my spare time, which there isn't much of it, has solely been King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, but specifically their search for the Holy Grail, which is supposed to be the cup that our Lord drank out of during the Last Supper. And what I found was that the Arthurian legends, despite what I read when I was younger, it must have been a cleaned up version, are really strange, and parts of it are kind of immoral, having to do with women. And then there's this strange wizard named Merlin in the midst of all this Catholic theology. Like, there is no such thing as good magic. It's only black magic from the devil. So I have no idea who wrote this and why that's creeping into these legends. It's so strange. All the knights were challenged as far as like purity and honor. And the only one that made it through all the challenges flawlessly was Sir Galahad. So he got to see the Grail, and then he asked to be taken up to heaven. Very unusual stuff. So that was kind of a downer after I finished the entire audiobook. As I was cooking breakfast for a week straight, I listened to this particular part of the Arthurian legends. And then I started thinking about, why did Adolf Hitler want Longinus' spear? What was that all about? And then I remember that there's a part in the Arthurian legends about Longinus' spear. There's this knight by the name of Sir Balin, and he kills the son of this king called Pelham. I'm not sure why he killed him. Must have been a bad guy. King Pelham gets really mad at him and challenges him to a duel, and Sir Balin runs away, and he runs into King Pelham's castle, and within the castle, he finds this beautiful room, and the bedspread's made of gold, and then he finds this spear. And as King Pelham walks through the door, he spears him. But before that, it says that he tried to lop off his head. I can't figure out if he lopped off part of his head and the guy was like mystically kept alive. I'm not quite sure. But at any rate, he spears King Pelham, who is a descendant of Joseph of Arimathea, who knew our Lord. And that spear was supposed to be the Spear of Longinus. And because he did that, the entire castle just collapses. And then it was called the Dolorous Stroke. And then there's all these plagues, I think, that afflict that part of the country, and it's his fault, so too bad, Sir Balin. He just ruined everything. And then I tried to find an actual disciplined study on why Hitler wanted the Spear of Longinus. So I get this book, and at the very outset, it says, this book was researched with the help of so-and-so and so-and-so, and it looks fairly well studied. And then I read the very first chapter, and it says, this spear that everyone was fighting over probably isn't the one. And then at the last chapter, it says, it's probably in Turkey. I don't know about any of that stuff, but I know that people have lied before with carbon-14 dating. So the one that Hitler stole is probably the real Spear of Longinus. So, and then he cites the Gospel of Nicodemus, which is an apocryphal gospel, and he calls Longinus Gaius Callus Longinus, which is, you can't cite the Gospel of Nicodemus as a legitimate source. I mean, it's ridiculous. But later on, he redeemed himself, and he actually had the Gospel of St. Luke, St. John, St. Matthew, and saying that when Longinus pushed the spear into our Lord's side and water and blood came out, that he said, surely this is the Son of God. You know, as we all know that story. And then a further legend, and I'm not sure where he got this because he didn't cite it. It might be the Golden Legend, but he's not very good at bibliography. But he says that when the water and blood came down on his eyes, that he was cured of blindness. And then Longinus went all throughout the land with the spear that had pierced our Lord's side and preached the gospel. And eventually, he was martyred, and the official that martyred him had some blood fall in his eye, and then he was cured of blindness, and then he converted too. That sounds like things that I have read before. It was very interesting. None of it's conclusive, but it's very interesting to think about. Now, why did Hitler want this spear? There's actually a long line of dictators that have wanted this spear, or the Spear of Destiny, because they said that when Napoleon came through the land in Nuremberg, they hid the spear in the bottom of this cave, and he never found it. But he thought that if he got the spear, legend says, he would be invincible. And Hitler thought the same. And in fact, he often visited the museum when he was younger, like a young artist, and he would just look at it for hours. And then when Hitler came to power and took over the museum later on, actually, I don't think it was a museum, it was probably a church, and he had the spear, he would sit for long hours and just look at it, and nobody would disturb him. This next part may seem totally bizarre, and I didn't believe it at first when I read it, but after all the evidence, I actually started to believe it. But Winston Churchill thought it was super important to look into why the Nazis were gathering all of these artifacts. And they actually had a double agent. It was a doctor. I can't remember his name. Dr. Peter. Dr. Peter was a double agent, and he would come over to England and talk with Winston Churchill about all of these artifacts. And he said the reason why is that the Nazis believe that if they spill enough blood as a sacrifice to Satan, and I guess if they have all of these artifacts and things as offerings for him, the devil will come and make them their own special race, like a hybrid of devil and man. That's a direct quote from this doctor. Devil and man. And then all of the other races will become slave races. And Adolf Hitler was grooming the SS to be this sort of master race. And he would get everyone together and they would try to talk to past leaders in Valhalla, past military heroes and things like that. It was all very freaky. That's why he had all these different castles, and they had little monuments to Valhalla and everything. It was bizarre. And then it got even worse and even more strange, and it sounded almost Hegelian to me because they said the world was made of fire and ice, and that conflict is the basis of life itself. And then they would look up at the moon, they would say, you know what? That's probably made of ice. I'm not joking, like their top scientists were saying these things. And I don't know if they truly believed it, but maybe they were just saying it to make Hitler happy. And they wanted to set up bases in Antarctica because they said this is where our Nordic ancestors came from, which it's not even right because that's the North Pole, not the South Pole. But anyway, and they did find it later on. That's not a myth. They actually had bases in Antarctica. Their plan was that when things went south, they would take the Spear of Destiny all the way down to their base in Antarctica. But that actually didn't happen. When things went south, they sent it to the bottom of this cave in Nuremberg. And ironically enough, that's exactly where they hid the spear when Napoleon came through, according to legend. Maybe Hitler knew about this legend and he wanted to emulate it. No, I don't believe any of this balderdash about the Spear of Destiny and whoever has it will be victorious forever, etc., etc. But I will tell you, and this is proven, that on the same night that the Allies found the Spear of Destiny in the Nuremberg cave, Hitler blew his brains out. So it's almost like they got the spear, and then Hitler lost all of his impetus and just ended it all. So that, in brief, is everything I've been studying through January. Pretty interesting stuff, but it's very hard to make a conclusive thesis about all of these things without just rambling. So I hope you got something out of it. I know it was a pretty bizarre episode, but I enjoyed telling you all about these things. We should be doing some more episodes pretty soon. Thank you all so much for listening, and Godspeed.